Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Bowie Speaks, a series of community conversations that we are having with you. We thank you for joining us this evening, and I want to also thank Mayor Adams and the City Council for their support in allowing us to have these community conversations. Also, I would like to thank Una Cooper, who is the city's communications director, and Lori Cunningham, who is the community outreach specialist for the city of Bowie, in their help in bringing these community conversations together. We have with us this evening Michael Esteve, Councilman Michael Esteve, and he will be giving some remarks to you shortly to welcome you to tonight's session. And we have some very distinguished panelists, and we will be introducing them shortly. We also have Sharon Hunt, who is with us tonight, and she is with the Community Outreach Committee, and she will be helping me to moderate this evening's session. I wanted to cover just a few housekeeping rules before we get started. This is being broadcast live, and I wanted you to know that you will be able to access this series also on YouTube through the city's government channel and also on the city's website at another time. However, you will need to and you can also use the hashtag Bowie Speaks on social media. However, if you have questions, you do need to type your questions into the Q&A, and we will be taking questions from the audience. And if you also have some comments that you would like to put in the Q&A, you can put those in there as well. We will also be posing a series of questions to you, the audience, and giving you the opportunity to have a conversation, because we want this to be as interactive as possible. And those will be done through polls. And so we'll ask you at certain times to answer polls. And so we want you to enjoy this series this evening. Again, just to let you know, it is being broadcast live and it is being recorded. And I want to turn it over right now to Councilman Esteve for his opening remarks.
Thanks so much, Alvita. I won't take up much time at all, other than to just say I really appreciate everyone's participation tonight. I really appreciate several of our city committees working together to put this event together and start off a series of very important conversations in our community. I appreciate, Alvita, your continued leadership. I appreciate the help and support of staff, my colleagues, and the mayor. And I look forward to tonight's conversation.
Thank you, Councilman Esteve. And again, my name is Alvita Dixon. I chair the Diversity Committee for the City of Bowie, and I am your moderator for this evening. I would like to, and Sharon Hunt with the Community Outreach will also be moderating as well. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce the panelists. However, they will have the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about themselves and give you a little bit longer introduction. And we have with us this evening, Mr. Bob Ross, who is the president of the Prince George's County branch of the NWCP. We also have Ms. Renee Battle Brooks, who's the executive director of the Prince George's County Human Relations Commission. And we have Dr. Adrian Krishna Sami, who is a professor at Bowie State University. And so I would like to start with Ms. Brooks, if you could introduce yourself to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. Just a little bit about the Human Relations Commission. I never want to miss an opportunity to give a short commercial about what we do. So we are the county's civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. So we have 5 pillars. The first one is exactly what you would imagine, and that is we investigate claims of discrimination where you work, live, or play in the county. It's simpler that way. The second thing we do is we are tasked with chairing the Human Trafficking Task Force, and we have lots of partners and members of that task force, from the faith-based community to local, state, and federal agencies, law enforcement, service providers, any imaginable thing we have on the task force. So we're always open and wanting to recruit businesses and anybody that would like to help us stamp out human trafficking in Prince George's County. That's both labor and sex. We are tasked with 3 things on the task force, and that is to identify and recover victim survivors, to increase prosecution of traffickers, and to educate the public. Our third pillar is we manage a deportation defense program in partnership with CARE. CARE stands for the Capital Area Immigrant Rights Coalition. And if you are a resident of Prince George's County and under threat of deportation, legal help is available to you, free. The fourth pillar is that we are tasked with managing an English language access program for public services. So what this means in essence is that if you are not proficient in English, that should not mean that you cannot get county services. So we are tasked with rolling out an amazing program to the agencies that are forward facing or public facing to really make sure that we're serving all of our diverse population, which brings me to our 5th pillar, and that is outreach and engagement. And here in Prince George's County, we have a rich fabric that's woven with people from every ethnicity, race, religion, sexual orientation, gender, whatever you can think, we are here. And so we believe that it's not enough to just live next to each other. We have to live together, because if one of us thrives, we all thrive. And so our public outreach is geared to building community so that in the long run, we are stamping out and reducing instances of hate, bias, and violence. So that's the HRC commercial in just a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Battlebrooks. Next, we like to have Mr. Bob Ross. Mr. Ross, if you could unmute yourself, please. Thank you.
Means Zoom sometimes we have issues. Good evening, my name is Bob Ross. I'm president of the Prince George's County NWCP. I've been the president for the last 9, going on 10 years. And we're always dealing with the civil rights issue, discrimination, human trafficking is another one that we deal with. So we had to start working with the Human Relations Commission. And our focus now, we have what we call our game changers. And basically we're dealing with economic sustainability, the environment, social justice, housing is a big one, because we know that we're going to lose possibly 91,000 people in the state of Maryland will be possibly eviction come January 1. And we deal with racial problems, getting people to understand the difference in the problem and what their perception might be versus what the reality of it. Because a lot of times people come in and think they're being discriminated against, but really they're not being discriminated against because of the lack of understanding. One, maybe the process. 2, understand their rights at their job. And one of the biggest issues we have, people just don't read the handbook, for example, and what is the aggressive discipline versus some other type of discipline. So we go through real in-depth process, and if it comes up to the point where we have to intervene, we have a wonderful legal redress team, and they're not lawyers, because we're not lawyers and we can't give legal advice. But Ernest Gooden, who is our legal redress chair, does an outstanding job in that area. So I'm going to end there. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Krishna Sami.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. I'm Dr. Adrian Krishna Sami. I'm a professor and graduate coordinator at Bowie State University for the Organizational Communication Program in the Department of Communications. Bowie State University places its importance in its core values, which I strongly adhere to. We are talking about civility, we are talking about inclusivity, we are talking about accountability, excellence, and innovation and vision. With all these values, especially with regard to civility and inclusivity, in 2012, the university opened one of its kind, a Gender and Sexualities Diversities Resource Center. According to the Human Rights Campaign, HRC, Bowie State was the first to open this kind of a center in an HBCU. I've been there for almost 13 years and counting. My research focuses on the role of how media or text is affected or affected by minority communities, particularly the LGBTQ community. My research also involves, within the LGBTQ community, examining the communication discourse, racism, and sexism issues as well.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna Sami. I want to say a few words about the Bowie Speaks series and how we came up with the idea. And the Community Outreach Committee and the Diversity Committee basically got together and we said, we need to do something as a community to address the issues that are going on in the nation. And a lot of things came to a head when, after the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery killings, and they continue to this day. Just had another one recently, Walter Wallace Jr. And a lot of these killings are people of color that are being killed by the police. And we did have a series, or we had a town hall meeting with the chief of police for the city of Bowie to explain the use of force practices in the city and to get a lot of your questions answered. But we knew that that was just going to be the tip of the iceberg, and that was where the conversations were going to start, but that's not where they were going to end. So the first conversation that we have today is basically focusing on the isms and the need for social justice. And isms has been defined as when you combine power, which is one's ability to exercise his or her own free will without any regard or expectation that there will be any consequences or willingness to accept whatever consequences they are. And when that is combined with prejudice, and prejudice is a belief about an individual or group that's formed without full knowledge. And so while we all may be biased, we may have certain preferences. I like summer better than I like winter. And so that's a bias that I have. However, when we get the isms, and what we're talking about with isms, we're talking about things such as racism, but we didn't want to just focus only on racism because we know that there's a lot of other isms out there. The hashtag Me Too movement brought to light a lot of the sexism that's still going on today. And there's also isms against the LGBTQIA community, and also against persons based upon their religious affiliation. And so what we, and also based on persons on the basis of age. So there's also ageism. So there's a lot of different isms that are out there. And what we wanted to do was to highlight some of those and help you to get a deeper understanding of what they are, how they exist, and also the impact, and then what we can do about addressing these issues as a community as a whole and helping us to move forward. So with that in mind, I'm going to give the panelists an opportunity to discuss some of their ideas about the different isms. And if this first question I would like to direct to Mr. Ross. And with this first question, if you could hold just a second, I lost my questions page. Lori, if you could put up that first question, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Here it is right here. Okay, Mr. Ross, how do you identify the isms? And what are the main social justice issues facing our nation today? So what is your understanding of what the isms are, and how does that impact social justice today?
The ism could be ageism, for example, dealing with our citizens, dealing with the LGBT community, and that's the ism. I know when we passed the Marriage Equality Act in Maryland about 4 years ago, that was a real big decision that NWCP had to make. And I did a video about that because I had a twin brother who was gay. And I told the story, but he was still my brother. So I had to learn how to deal with that because I still loved him the same way. But a lot of folks, I think, it's more of a stereotype, and they really don't take the time to understand the person that they're really dealing with. They have this perception about people, or racism because you're Black, for example, then that grew up from a lower class. Your mother, well, like this morning at the conversation, we had this one guy, he really feel that young girls today are on welfare and having kids just out of wedlock to be having kids to collect a check. So that's a concept that I thought was dead. But yet apparently some young people feel that women today are having children just be having children to collect a check. Particularly in this county, that doesn't exist, or most around the world. So, and this guy is only 43 years old. And I wonder how he developed that concept. So there's a lot that's going on. If you're out in the community, you get to see it, and sometimes you can get it resolved. So with him, me and some other guys, we'll probably spend about another 6 months trying to show him that now your perception is totally wrong. So a lot of it is about perception and lack of knowledge of individuals and particular groups of individuals, because this is a very diverse. But I am proud of the younger people today. I see the difference between my 30-year-old son and my 49-year-old son, and how they perceive society. And it is like night and day. So it's really interesting. But we start dealing with ism. Some of it is in a group. We talk about it at the NWCP, but a lot of it is on the individual day-to-day operation between you and that individual.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. I'd also like to direct the question to Renee Battle Brooks. Miss Brooks, Miss Battle Brooks, excuse me, I'm sorry. How do the isms show up in terms of the the complaints that you get from the Human Relations Commission, because Mr. Ross mentioned that it starts with a perception or a bias. However, when we're talking about ism, then that's when it really goes to a different level, when you're starting to combine that power, and that probably plays out in some of the complaints that you might see at the Human Relations Commission. So how does that play out? And then what percentage of complaints do you see that involve racism or sexism or ageism or LGBTQIAism?
So, I think isms is everything that you said, but I think there's also a broader view. I think that just like Mr. Ross said, we are all shaped by our isms, whether we know it or not. And so that's the first thing. And some of these structures of isms exist, and we could be very good people and not understand that that structure exists. So I don't want to paint everybody in the ism with having sort of a prejudice, because I think we miss the opportunity to engage and educate. So we're shaped by how we were brought up. Now, we may, if we're part of there's a wonderful book actually written by Verna Myers, What If I Say the Wrong Thing? And it's 25 Habits of Culturally Effective People. So if we first have to acknowledge that these things exist and be open, right? So drilling down to your question, in our discrimination investigations, we do see sexism, we see ageism, we see racism, we see isms about gender or sexual preference. We don't like to talk about statistics, but what I will say is that although we handle where you work, live, or play, so that's employment, education, public accommodations, housing, etc., we see majority in education, in employment. And with that, we see the various isms that we talk about. So I don't know if I answered your question, but.
Thank you. If you could just to shed a little more light, what would be an example of what one of those isms would look like?
Through the HRC lens at employment or overall? Well, I can give quite a few, right? So
just an example of what an ism would look like as opposed to just a regular bias or prejudice.
An ism, xenophobia, ism, religious oppression, in anti-Semitism, Islamophobism, classism. Most of us don't recognize that in ourselves. How about elitism? We don't recognize that. And if we're in what Vera calls the group up, we don't recognize that. If you're in the group down, because she doesn't like to use the word dominant or non-dominant or whatever the words that we use, the group up, we don't recognize it. And so those are examples of things that each of us can be actually culpable without recognizing it. Are we bad persons? No. Do we do it, overtly and consciously? Probably not. But it's filtered through the lens that we were raised in and what our social dynamics are and what our cultural dynamics are. So there are lots of isms out there.
Okay, so for example, for employment, so if a person says, I was told that I was too old to learn this technology, would that raise a red flag for something such as ageism?
It could very possibly, yes, with other factors. So if that happens, contact us. We would be happy to look into it for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next question that I have is for Dr. Krishna Sami. And what are the similarities and the differences in social justice now and social justice the way it looked 50 or 60 years ago?
Okay, so I would think that social justice then would be the actual movement itself. For example, the civil rights movement compared to the Black Lives Matter movement. The gay and lesbian rights would be equal to the gay pride parades that we see today. Those type of movements, as long as the message is out there, we are fighting for equality, we are fighting for our rights. If the message is there, then that will be the only similarity that I would see. The difference is our mindset about a lot of things have changed. Because these topics of racism, sexism, heterosexism, any of those issues we have acknowledged before are kind of surfacing right now. So we are kind of new to it, but not so new to it, but we know of people's existence. And how we use our voices today using various platforms bring about our voices to contradict or to challenge the social change, the social order, the hegemonic systems, the patriarchy. So I think it's more of our voice and how we use it today in full of its effectiveness. So I think one of the things that that I was looking at an article about if you're still doing social justice, how will you then reconsider? So the author focuses on looking at the aspects of work that led to more than just the now period. Be honest about what's distracting us and what would be a distraction about what we know now and what has changed then. And also we need to stop acting to believe or thinking how we did then, and what is going to be changed now. So what are you going to do about it? That's the action piece. If we encounter racism, if we encounter homophobia, if we encounter heterosexism in all aspects, how do we confront it?
Yes, that's an excellent point. Thank you, Dr. Krishna Sami, because we know that when we had the civil rights movement, we had Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was leading the civil rights movement, and it was a nonviolent movement and protests that were being done nonviolently. However, that does not mean that because the protesters were nonviolent, that violence was not directed towards the protesters. So would you say that what's going on today with the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests that are going on today, are they more or less violent or about the same?
It is portrayed as more violent. It is portrayed as more disorderly, more destructive. I honestly would like to say that people are angry. I'm not trying to condone, okay, the damage of property, that's how we should let our anger. People are angry. And this, sometimes that is a nonverbal action to let people know that there needs to be change, in my opinion.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to move to moderator Sharon Hunt. I believe that she wants to ask the audience some questions and see if they have any questions for the panelists.
So we actually have a question right now in the question and answer box, and we're gonna ask that first because it goes along with this. How are the isms being addressed in the school system so we can begin earlier educating our students? And I will throw that out to all the panelists. I'll read it again. How are the isms being addressed in the school system so we can begin earlier educating our students?
I can answer that question. Um, so this is an ongoing sort of a question. Should we have an intercultural class at what grade level? How early should people learn about people, other identities, other cultures, and how do we accommodate that in a communication sense? So I would definitely support what we call an intercultural education. It is more to learn about who we are. We want to have a sustainable way of living together in this multicultural society. But one of the things that we really need to understand is how do we do it out of understanding each other and respect each other? How do we teach empathy? That's also one of the things that we need to tell students, teach students. How do we see it in this way, but not in another way? Help them focus on sort of a multi-perspective view, not from their standpoint, to see how other people live, how other people react to messages, how people relate to each other, just because you're different from one another. That's important.
If I could,
Anybody want to add to that?
sure.
Okay.
You know, I'm not in the school system, but I would like to add to what Dr. Adrian said. You know, studies show that children actually don't see race, don't see the differences. So we can learn from children. They see the commonalities. And I think it's never too early once they start teaching them about, you know, what we have in common, and we're all human beings and we all bleed red and we all have the same aspirations to make a better life for ourselves and those we love and all of these things. So that's what I would say.
Mr. Rosser, you're on mute if you're saying something.
Sometimes parents and adults just need to step out the way and allow children to be children, because they don't have no prejudice when they first start. That's a learned behavior, and we have to allow them to grow and develop. And I just go back to my childhood. We had a white family that lived next door to us in Philadelphia, and the young girl I was a young guy, only about maybe 6, 7 years old, and the parents saw me talking, or we was talking, just a general conversation, and the father got real upset about her and I talking, and eventually they moved. But I wasn't aware of the prejudices that was this, because when I lived on the farm in Virginia, we had white neighbors on both sides of us, and we all got along very, very well. So when we came to the city, it seemed like we discovered this new behavior that we wasn't totally aware of. And then my mother used to, and we couldn't figure out why we had to ride on the back of the trolley in Philadelphia. And I asked my mother, I said, why are we riding on the back of the trolley? She said, shh, be quiet. And it was because of the neighborhood that we lived in. And we wasn't allowed to cross certain streets. I'm so glad that that doesn't exist. But a lot of times in people's mind, they don't cross certain streets, and they allow that behavior to constantly exist in them. So we have to really sit down and be honest with each other when we start talking about racial issues and things of that nature. Thank you.
So Elvita, we have a few questions in here. We can let me just take the two that go along with the school, if that's okay, to carry on with that, and then we'll go to the polls. And I'll ask one panelist to answer this. And actually, I don't even know if you can answer this. How is it that we're the richest Black county in America, but our school system does not reflect that, including the foundation and teaching system? What is the city trying to do to change this? And I know there's no city representatives on here. Oh, Michael. Council Councilman? Did you get that question?
I did.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Putting you on the spot here.
That's fine. You want to just repeat it for everyone?
So what is the city trying to do to change, to improve our school system?
Yeah, so on the city's end, there's not a ton that we can do because the city does not run the schools, which is the single biggest misnomer we deal with in Bowie. We have zero control over the schools. That being said, we do work closely with our Board of Elections. We have a wonderful relationship with many of our Board of Elections officials. Rahila Ahmed and I toured just about every public school in the city. We had a lot of wonderful conversations with principals, with students, with parent-teacher organization leaders. And among the things we talked about are inclusion and making sure that everyone feels welcomed. Bowie, of course, has some of the most diverse schools in the region, in the country. And so, you know, for us, it's really, really, really important that our schools are a place where everyone, teachers, students, faculty, support staff, can feel safe, can feel at home, can feel welcomed. And so that is something we're very interested in. At the city level, one of the biggest things we've done this past year is the council unanimously supported, with the help of Ms. Dixon and others, starting an effort to recruit a professional firm to review all of our city policies. So we don't control schools, but we do a lot of other things. We have a police department. We manage parks. We do public works. We do all sorts of stuff. We have a lot of community service programs. We have youth and family services office. So what we're doing is we're going to be hiring a firm that specializes in this, and they're going to be doing a comprehensive review of all city policies to ensure that we are fully in compliance, not only with state and federal laws, which have been updated in the last 10 years since we last did this, but also ensure that we are an active partner in equity, right, on an intersectional basis, race, gender, sexual orientation, all the above, and to ensure that we continue to be proactive in our work in ensuring that Bowie is a place that everyone can feel comfortable calling home. And so that is one positive thing that we're doing. And a lot of people on this call were very helpful in that effort.
Okay, thank you.
Sharon, I just wanted to add one of the things as far as the schools that the Diversity Committee does is we try to educate students about nonviolence and social justice every year with the Martin Luther King Jr. program that is sponsored. It's a contest that's sponsored by the Diversity Committee, and we engage school-age students from kindergarten through second grade in a coloring contest, and from third to fifth grade in a poster contest, and then from 6th through 12th grade in a multimedia contest where the students are asked to either color a picture, develop a poster, or to develop some type of multimedia video that addresses a particular theme that we have each year that teaches them about the social justice issues that are going on in the nation, and teaches them in light of some of the teachings that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had. So that's another way that the city is trying to make sure that these issues are addressed in the schools.
Okay, thanks. I think we'll take 2 polls now. Okay, so you have just a couple seconds to answer this. What ism do you struggle with the most? Racism, sexism, LGBTQIA-ism, classism, ageism, religionisms? Okay, let's see what we have for responses. Okay, so racism and classism, am I reading that right? Yes, those two seem to be the biggest. Okay. Interesting that religionism had 0, so that's interesting. Next poll, please. And just so you all should be able to check the box there to answer these. How important is it to discuss the impact of isms and the need for social justice? Very important, somewhat important, and not important. So hopefully you all can see that on your screen and you're checking them off. Okay, let's see the answers, please. Very important from everybody. Yes, we think so too. Okay, I'm going to turn it back to you, Alvita.
Thank you, Sharon. Okay, this next question is directed towards Mr. Ross. Which ism do you think is the most misunderstood? And if you could take yourself off mute, please. Thank you.
Classism. In this county, I think people have judge people by their status and where they work. And they tend to forget about the least among us. And I say that very carefully, because when we get back, it sort of ties into that whole school issue before. And how we can improve the school system is to stop sending our kids to private school and putting our kids back into public school and getting parents' engagement involved. So that's where that classism come in, because you can afford to go to a private school and pay your taxes, and then turn around and pay tuition, $30,000, $40,000 a year to get a better education. But yet that same money could be put back into the school system if you were to get engaged with the community. So that is very important. That's something that we always talk about as sort of past. But the wealth gap in the county creates a classism that I think sometimes people get misunderstood when you are the most wealthy African American county in the country. And I look at that, and I know many people that are millionaires here in the county, but you would never see them supporting a nonprofit or help an organization move ahead. Why? Because they don't want to invest back into their community, because in my opinion, it may help someone that's on the bottom round to move ahead. So we have to look at that, how we address it as a county.
Thank
I know
you.
that's shocking.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Did any of the other panelists want to give a different perspective?
Okay, I'll jump in really quickly. I actually agree with Dr. Ross about, I think that my top three isms are classism first, elitism, and then owners, they're upper to middle class, and they could be in managerial. The one down would be the poor, the working class, and the wage workers. For elitism, the variable is education level and place in hierarchy. So the one up group would be college educated, top 20 to 40 schools. And the one down for elitism would be not college educated, less prestigious schools. And last, the linguistic oppression. Of course, language is the variable. The one up are the English speakers, and the one down are the non-English speakers.
Thank you, Ms. Battles Brooks.
I'd like
Dr. Krishna Sami.
Yeah, I would like to comment on the very basic concept that our society really focuses on is the gender of a child, which goes on to genderism. Several scholars have talked about the idea that the biological sex of a child determines the sexual orientation of that particular child. It determines that. We need to sort of unlearn this rigidity of viewing gender in these concrete forms, because when we view gender in the strictest forms, we are never going to allow gender fluidity. We are never going to allow other kind of identities, let alone understanding those identities and saying, oh, this is something really new. This really didn't exist when I grew up. So why is this all sort of coming up right now? So genderism is one of the things. I think we need to take the blue and the pink away and have some gender neutral colors. I think that's what we need to kind of focus. The very basic concept is gender.
I'm sorry. The next question that I have is for Ms. Battle Brooks. And the question is, what is equity and how is it different from equality?
So great question. So I'm always reminded by an illustration, and I'm sure those that have gone to seminars will see this. So the difference between equity and equality. So if we are all, it's that visual that we see with the fence, right? If we are all given the opportunity to look over the fence, equality is giving everybody the same box to stand on without taking into consideration the various height discrepancies. Equity is giving the shorter person a taller box so that he or she can see over the fence, just like the tall person, or as I like to say, the normal height person, because some consider me tall. I consider myself normal. So, so equity, equality, so that we can all, equity makes sure that we all can look over the fence. I can't hear.
Thank you. Okay. And the next question is for Dr. Krishna Sami. And I want to ask you about how isms become or come into existence. How are they shaped by one's perception, one's culture, one's environment? And we are all socialized differently to see in terms of how we see ourselves, how we see other people, and how we see the world. And for example, there was a recent article involving a university in Virginia that said that systemic racism did not exist at that university. And yet students of color had to walk past Confederate statues every day to be able to go to class and get an education. There had also been reports of racist incidents in that school, but yet there were many who were in the administration that didn't see it, didn't think that it would exist. So my question to you is, how does ethnicity, environment, and culture shape one's thinking when it comes to isms and when it comes to social justice?
So this is how I teach all these intersections in my classroom, with how who you are, where you grew up from, or your environment, or your culture, sort of kind of gives someone a narrative to talk about. What I do is I teach a theory class called Critical Theories in Communication, Theories and Research, and specifically looking at critical race theory. Now, this theory looks at a critical analysis of race and racism, and looks at the race, the law, and the power that the law has in regards to racism. With this examination of this critical race theory, whether it be ethnicity, whether it be culture, or whether the environment, we must always observe and listen to the narratives from the people that talk about themselves, talk about where they're from, talk about the environments that they are in, talk about their culture, then we can evolve from this. It's not a bunch of, okay, let's hear your story. Let's a lot of stories out there we want to hear, but what makes a story unique? What makes it special? And how does it contribute to our understanding of who we are in our society? We want to have this piece because most of our stories involve representations that talk about the patriarchal culture, the hegemonic culture, the culture that's, you know, superior in a lot of sense, and good things are associated with that. What about culture for those who are a little different from the mainstream culture or the superior cultures that we have noticed?
Thank you. Okay, this time I want to turn it back over to Sharon Hunt to take some questions from the audience.
Okay, the question is, what role does the church play in addressing isms? How can the church, sadly the most segregated organization, become more multicultural? Who would like to tackle that?
I'll jump in.
Okay, thank you.
So, of course, there are many different religions. So I can only speak from the Christian faith because that happens to be my religious affiliation. And so what I will say from the Christian faith is if one calls yourself a Christian, that means that you're emulating Christ-like behavior. And if you're a Christian and are emulating Christ-like behavior, then his model in the New Testament is what drives. And he was tolerant, and he had all sorts of diverse people in his group. He fought racism, he fought elitism, he fought all of those isms that were alive and well, just as divisive as it is in our culture. And so, in answer to the question, we have to become serious if we call ourselves Christian. If not, don't do it. You know, we are tasked with that. So I think that there has to be an acknowledgement that as Christians, we're not perfect and there's lots of room to grow, and that we have to start acting as if we are. Harsh, but that's what I think. So that's just from the Christian perspective.
I can speak from a Catholic background. Thank you, Renee. It really helps a lot. With a Catholic background, it is, you know, I grew up in Singapore where there was a lot of, you know, a little bit of racial discrimination. Of course, the church did never took the time to address sexuality issues. They never took time to address racial issues or anything of that sort. So Singaporeans were kind of like, oh, well, you know, this, if my pastor or my priest doesn't talk about these kind of things, it doesn't exist. So anything outside the church, I don't have to know, I don't want to know. And that's a creation of sin. So priests, pastors, people who are in religious congregations should talk about these issues because these exact people are living amongst us. You know, teach humanity. I think that's the best approach.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Ross, it looks like you're getting ready to say something. You're on mute.
You know, it's the community, and the church is part of the community. And I tell folks, you have to know your subculture within your community norms and values. And what makes up a community is the 5 behavioral sciences: sociology, archaeology, biology, psychology. That makes it, and once you understand that, those different pieces, you can understand how it fits in. Now, the church plays a big role in our society. But the most segregated place in America on Sunday is the church. Why is that? That's because we're trying to change decades of things that have occurred. And, and I think we're beginning to bridge that. I see more integration in the church. But if we live in any community, we must learn to get along with everybody, whether you're black, white, whatever. And I think we got to get this fear out of us that somebody is here to take something from us, try to take our jobs, trying to marry our daughters or marry our sons. That fear. So we got to break down that fear within our own community. So fear is really what's holding us back. I think fear in the church is holding the church back from really reaching out to the total community, because Prince George's County has a large immigrant community, and we have to embrace that community. But sometime, and I hate to say it, the last 4 years have brought back some things that I think people have put out their mind, and we have had a setback in race relations in this country. And hopefully that will change in the next 4 years, because you got to give hope that there's going to be a better society that we can live in. And I think we can do it. Social justice, because remember the March on Washington in 1963, I was there. I'm 76. So I was at the March on Washington. And what was it for? Social justice, job and social justice. Just wanted to be treated fairly, to have the ability to take care of our family. You know, like Dr. King said, he who ends the race last must run ever so hard to catch up to the front. But when you keep bringing up old isms, reminding people, and a lot of young people don't even realize that those isms that we had, riding in the back of the bus, the fear of someone going to attack you, not be able to go south. When I was in the service, I had to ride on the back of the bus, for example, to go visit my twin brother who was in service. So, but we have, and I love Prince George's County. I came in 2001, and I thought it was a mecca that I had came to. And then when you start peeling back the onions, you start seeing some of the things. But we are in a good place to fix this quickly if we all just get in and just tell what we need to say and love everyone to the best of our ability. And the church can help us to do that.
Amen, Mr. Ross. We have a question for the councilman. Why did the city promote a universal pre-K program that was really a partnership with Reed Temple School and had income requirements that were very hard to meet? As a single mother, I am not poor enough to get my child in public pre-K, but not rich enough to send her to private school.
Sure. So there was a lot of media coverage about the $400,000 that went from the state to Reed Temple, which is actually in Glendale, insisting that this was somehow universal pre-K in Bowie. That was very far from accurate. The city has not established, nor even could if it wanted to establish, a universal pre-K program. So there was a lot of misunderstanding around that, and a lot of the reporting around that was simply wrong. What happened was the mayor, who, as I understand it, has a relationship with Reed Temple, helped to connect Reed Temple to a state program that gave $400,000 as I understand it, a pilot to help create, I believe it was like 40 slots for affordable pre-K. Again, Reed Temple's in Glendale, not in Bowie. The city did let people know about the program, since Reed Temple said they would accept students from across the region, including in Bowie. But this was not a universal pre-K program or anything close to it. I do believe that in future years, the state's going to be debating the Kerwin Commission, which includes an expansion of affordable pre-K, as I understand it. but that conversation is going to be happening at the state level. And even this program was funded by the state. So whereas the city can promote certain programs and can let people know about, what's available, we don't have a lot of control over education. Ultimately, the funding is going to come predominantly from the state, followed by the county, and be administered predominantly by the county or by individual programs, in this case, as it was at Reed Temple. But if you do have a specific question about the program, the best person to talk to is probably going to be the mayor, and you can reach out to him at tadams@cityofbowie.org. And he's your best point of contact for that if you have any specific questions.
Okay, thank you. We're going to do our third poll now. How easy is it for you to have discussions about isms or equity with people who are different from you? Easy, somewhat difficult, difficult. Okay, let's see the results, please. All right, the majority, 63%, said somewhat difficult, and nobody said difficult, which I guess that's good, but very few people said easy, and it is not often easy. So, okay, but our panelists are going to help us with that hopefully towards the end, right? Okay, turning back to you, Elvita.
Thank you, Sharon. And I really appreciate all of your insight on these issues. Mr. Ross, you mentioned that fear was one of the biggest ways that the isms show up, and they have an impact on our community. But I want you to speak just a little bit more to the impact of isms. And thank you also for sharing your experiences during the civil rights movement, because those are invaluable. And when we can have those kinds of dialogue and those kinds of conversations, that's what will help people to understand more, and it can bridge some of the gaps that we have and the difficulties in having some of these tough conversations. So thank you again for sharing your experience. The question I want, though, to direct to you is a little more focused on how these isms are having an impact in terms of voting and also housing. For example, with the housing, we know of the well, starting with the city of Bowie back in 1963, the city of Bowie had protests because the Levitt community had restrictive covenants. And that's because the developer basically put these restrictive covenants in that would not allow houses in the community to be sold to Jews or African Americans. There also have been things such as redlining practices, making it more difficult for African Americans and people of color to be able to get mortgages, and then the undervaluing of houses that are in a predominantly African American neighborhoods. So if you could speak a little bit to the term, how the isms are impacting those areas in housing, but also in the area of voting, because we're coming right up on an election right now. And so we're hearing people saying that there's voter suppression out there, but I want to get your perspective on some of these issues.
Fortunately, I only can speak for Prince George's County on the voter suppression issue. It's not a problem here in Prince George's County. And we worked the polls the last couple of days. There's a high turnout. Other parts of the country, they are doing things that are similar, particularly with returning citizens in Florida. They want them to pay their fines before they can vote, and we're working very hard on that issue. Housing and redlining still exists today. It exists right here in the county. And one of the things, because we have some of the highest foreclosure rate because of 2008 when the market crashed, and we're still trying to recover from that. And the big banks and stuff got to bail out. The people didn't get a bailout. And a lot of people are still fighting it. Then the topic, now we have the pandemic that came in. People are out of work. And we're working on the housing issue since 2010, trying to save people houses that was in the foreclosure. But now we're also going to have the eviction problem that's coming up. Now, the eviction problem is unfair to both sides. I want to be real clear on that, because property owners have to pay their mortgage. If they're not receiving rent from their tenants, everybody is suffering. So how do we address that issue? We've been lobbying hard and in Washington particularly to get the stimulus package. I would rather see a $1,200 stimulus package is not going to resolve the issue. We need at least a $2,500 stimulus package for everybody here to sort of get them on their feet. Trying to talk realistically to people who own property to work out some kind of agreement to pay the arrears in a way that's beneficial to both the landlord or to the mortgage company and to the tenant or the person that's buying their home. Redlining coming, everybody thinks Prince George's County eventually, because of the low values on your homes, and it really is not low value, but you have a group of people that will be coming in that can afford to buy the home. Home sales in Prince George's County is doing real good. Just had a girl sell a home in 3 days, $500,000. No, in 3 days. Okay, so that's not an issue, but your neighborhood is going to become more diverse over the years. And who I really feel bad for is the 30 years old. The 30-year-old, they're the ones that are going to feel the impact because they can't afford to buy because there's no affordable housing here in the county. And we need to look at affordable housing and see how do we those people who are just coming out of college, who are in debt, those people that didn't go to college, where they're going to work, because we talk about minimum wage is only $7.50 an hour here in this country, and if we look at if we went to $15 an hour, now we're only putting them at about $31,500, I believe that figure, and $31,000 a year in Prince George's County is tough when you had the average apartment running about $1,200 a year. So we have to look at creative ways and look at how do we bring businesses to the county that will get the jobs that are needed. Like people was talking about the P3 project, for example, building the 6 new schools. And Dr. Thornton made a real good point the other night when he said most of the schools going to be built inside the Beltway. What people didn't realize that a lot of those jobs are going to be jobs that pay what we call prevailing wage. And a prevailing wage job starts off by $25 an hour. That doesn't require a lot of skill, and that would put people back to work. So our county and to sort of help with the redlining. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you. The next question is for Ms. Battle Brooks. What do you believe is the role of government and other organizations, including lending organizations, in addressing some of these issues in preventing isms in housing, voting, etc.?
Great question. So I think first we all have to acknowledge that these isms were put in place, and the isms, and when I talk about systems of isms, and they're working exactly the way they were supposed to. So we as people have to become educated about redlining, about what it means, about how it came about in our history under the New Deal in our history, right? We have to understand how it works, how the mortgage, how the insurance works with the mortgage, how all of that, and how it was designed for a very particular reason, right? So we have to understand that. And then we collectively, I'm a big believer of grassroots, how this country was formed with grassroots push and power, and we have the power as people. We have ceded that power over to those that we have put in places, whether it's in Washington, D.C. at the national level or in Annapolis at the state level. We have ceded that power over to them, and we don't bother to call and to demand, what is your vote on this issue? Do you have a bill on this issue? So that's the first thing. When we're talking about organizations, we have to be intentional as an organization in acknowledging that those isms exist. We have to be intentional about when you're part of the majority or the group that is the one up group, that it exists, and that there are others that you look around and say, well, we don't have sexism here. We don't have racism here. We don't have, all of the isms here. We have to acknowledge that we in fact do in every institution. And so you have to be willing to change and to reach out to get professionals to come. They're not calling you bad or bad persons. I think the role in government, well, our agency, the Human Relations Commission, the HRC, we are tasked with, when it becomes overt, to holding those government agencies, those businesses to task. But we can only do that if people let us know. So we have to have a complaining person, unless there's something that is so outrageous that it comes to our attention, then we don't. So I think the first thing is education for all of us. So that's all of us as well as organizations, and then being willing to acknowledge that there is disparity here. There are systems that are put in place. And just to tag on to what Mr. Ross said, your zip code affects everything. Your zip code affects everything. It affects the quality of education. It affects your job, your career path, right? Because if you don't have a solid education, it's going to impact your choices for career. If you live in the wrong zip code, maybe there are transportation issues, maybe they're not. It affects how you engage with law enforcement. It affects your political willingness to engage. It affects your health care. It affects so much. And so we as a society have to be willing to acknowledge that there are disparities. If we look now, there's more segregated housing than there was years ago, more. We have to ask, why is that? Is that something we should allow? Is that something we're comfortable with? It is not. And we all need to, with this new awakening or reawakening for some, we have to acknowledge that, again, when one of us thrives, this is in the United States now, we all thrive. And so if we want to build a better place for all of us, we all have to be willing to engage in this work of education, self-education, and acknowledging that there are things we all can learn.
Thank you. And I'd like to also ask Dr. Krishna Sami, along those lines, what should a person do if one encounters a situation where an ism is being demonstrated, and how can we as a community overcome the obstacles that are created by some of these isms and their impact?
So I have to agree with Renee on this whole idea of, how do we, what do we want to know? This whole self-awareness imperatives, who we are, what do we want to know? Where do we want to live? What are our contributions to society? How comfortable are we in, what is our perception of the other? What is the how am I going to acknowledge the other? Or how am I going to go about, addressing someone who is a different race or different ethnicity? I think we see a lot of parallel sort of movements. We see, like the LGBTQ movement, and then we'll see the government sort of running parallel to it. A lot of times is that we don't really feel like people are actually having conversations about it. That's, I think, where I'm not saying anything new. It's just that why aren't we not having conversations about those two parallel ideas? If we are fighting for rights, voice is important. How we are, actively on social media to inform people of police brutality, or somebody who's attacked being gay, or something of that sort, or egregious crime, you know, we need to be able to voice that, and have people in government to make that into law so that people will follow the law.
Thank you. And that kind of brings us to our last question. And because you all spoke to it already, but did anyone have any final thoughts? To address your comments, Dr. Krishna Sami, that's why we're having these discussions here, these Bowie Speaks conversations, because, you know, we wanted to start that ball rolling. We can't make all of the changes in the government and the laws, but we can certainly have the conversations, and that's what this series is all about. But any final thoughts from any of the panelists can answer this on how we can get involved, anything additional on how we can get involved in a positive way to address social justice issues. And you have 1 minute.
Become aware, become civically minded, understand the laws, understand what's out there. There are laws that are being passed nationally that are taking us back 100 years. We have to become aware. So educate. The library, HRC is partnered with the library, one of our partners, but they're a fabulous partner. And we have engagements 2-3 times a week in the evening. And we talk about various books. We have authors, we have HRC has panel discussions. We have to decide that this is important and we have to educate ourselves. And there's help out there. Just start, you know, looking things up and attach yourself to something. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Battlebrooks. Anyone else? Dr. Ross? I mean, excuse me, Mr. Ross.
Y'all can call me Dr. Ross. I don't know why, but thank God for the rumors. I attended the PWI, Penn State, and I came out in 1974. And one of the things that they recognized immediately that there was a problem on campus with groups. And they created what we call a community awareness program, where we took people from different ethnic groups from around the world, trained them how to go and they were assigned to residential areas to work in a resident hall. And I happen to be a community awareness aide. I think something like in Bowie, if you do something like that, bringing ethnic groups together, regardless of boundaries, and have them sit down and start addressing these issues and the ism that may exist. But you can't, a lot of people is in fear to be open and honest, but you gotta be open and honest and to start a true discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Krishna Sami, any final thoughts?
Yes, along with Mr. Ross, truth is really, really important, you know, understanding who we are. So by finding out the truth or learning about the truth, sometimes we have to unlearn some of the myths about our gender, our race, our class, our, you know, whatever all these isms are. We have to unlearn those myths and relearn history. We have to relearn history. We need to not look at just Dr. Martin Luther King alone. Let's observe some of the strong women civil rights leaders that were present during that time, and what were their roles, what were their tasks, you know, empower them. So relearn history. And I think we tend to be right in the now sort of a situation and forget about where we sort of came from. We need to find that place. And of course, with that, we need to learn the truth.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Sharon Hunt. I think she has a couple of questions from the audience, and then we have a couple of polls.
Okay, the first question, this is directed to you, Mr. Ross. With the rise of the white supremacy groups, has the membership in the NWCP increased proportionately?
Our membership it definitely has increased. We've seen a 40% increase in membership, and that's throughout the country. We are reshaping the NWCP to address those issues nationally. So yes, membership is picking up. And If you want to join the local branch in NWCP, please go to our website, pgcnwcp.org, and we welcome. But we don't want you just to be a card-carrying member. I believe engaging the total community to be a part of the NWCP. If you come to work, not just to carry a card.
Okay, thank you. And last question, and then we have 2 polls. Do you feel that the situation here is better than elsewhere in the country? So I guess we could say, do we feel like it's better in Bowie? I think it's or better in Prince George's than it is elsewhere in the country.
Sharon, could we just ask Mr. Esteve to answer that, Councilman Esteve, to answer that last question, please? Thank you.
Yeah, so I have the opportunity to spend quite a lot of time throughout the state and throughout the region. I've seen kind of how politics and communities look firsthand all over the country. And I will say that while, we always want to find ways to improve, overall, I think we are doing pretty well in Maryland and in Prince George's. A lot of that just has to do with the fact that we are a diverse place. It's extraordinary when you go even just 45 minutes west of here or an hour and a half east of here, how that diversity vanishes, right? And, we kind of know psychologically that when people live in places where they are pretty much only exposed to people like themselves, of the same race, of the same, income level, the same immigration status or religion, it really does not help their ability to sort of see the world for its actual, like, real diversity, right? And it can unfortunately reinforce a lot of unhealthy habits, right? Cognitively, interpersonally, and otherwise. And so I think just the fact that Maryland is kind of a miniature America in all of its diversity really puts us in an advantageous place where our people, you have to go pretty much into the nooks and crannies of Maryland to find a place where there isn't a lot of diversity. And I think that helps us a great deal. I can tell you, I was in West Virginia not that long ago doing some work and pre-pandemic, and I was in a restaurant where I overheard a conversation at a table near me where they were sort of joking about this friend of theirs who had been completely cut out from his family because he was gay. And they were just kind of making fun of the guy and like talking about it as though, no big deal, And as a gay person sitting in the table next to them, not only was that just in general very discomforting, but it was a reminder that, not all the country is the same. We're a nation of 320 million people. We're a big place. And so, even I kind of live in a little bit of a progressive bubble right outside of DC, where I forget that, yeah, there are large swaths of America that have not gotten the memo, right, on a lot of issues. And so I think we're doing very well. Obviously, we always want to get better. But I think we're very fortunate, and we're in a much better starting place than a lot of other places are.
All righty, thank you. Now we're going to take our last 2 poll questions. How well do you understand the impact of isms and the social justice issues facing our nation? Very well, well, not well at all. Okay, and let's see the responses. So very well and well. Okay. And next poll, last poll. Which topic would you like to see for the next Bowie Speaks community conversations? Role of religious, social, and civic organizations in the quest for social justice, impact of social determinants of health in a COVID environment, how to heal and move forward, how to become an ally. Okay, let's see the answers, please. Alrighty. Role of religious, social, and civic organizations in the quest for social justice. Oh, okay. And then next would be how to become an ally, and then the impact of social determinants of health on COVID. Okay. Alrighty. Back to you, Elvita.
Thank you, Sharon. And I want to, at this time, thank all of our distinguished panelists for your comments, for your insight on this very important topic. And I hope the audience enjoyed it and you all learned a lot. And that last poll question involved the other topics that we have in this series that we have come up with so far. And so we wanted to hear from you so that we could present the topics that you are the most concerned about. And so it looks like that the next one will be the role of religious, social, and civic organizations in the quest for social justice. And we will make sure that we announce that time and that date when we will be having that next town hall meeting in the Bowie Speaks series. So again, I want to thank all of you for your participation. And if any of you would have any additional questions for any of the panelists and you need to contact them, their information is showing now on the screen. Miss Renee Battle Brooks, Prince George's Human Relations Commission at HRC staff at county.co.pg.marylandmd.us. And then Mr. Robert Ross, President of Prince George's County NAACP, President at pgcnaacp.org. And Dr. Adrian Krishna Sami at Bowie State University, krishnasami@bowiestate.edu. So please feel free to contact them if you have any additional questions. And I'm going to turn it over now to Council Member Esteve for our closing remarks.
Elvita, thank you so much. And as promised, I will also keep these short. I just want to say a huge thank you. Sharon, Elvita, thank you so much for putting this together. Thank you for your extraordinary continued work for the city. For those of you who don't know, Elvita and Sharon have been involved in City of Bowie volunteerism for a combined like 100 years, probably. Somehow they're both still in their 30s, but yet they've given all this time. We don't know how it's possible, but they have. I can't thank you enough for your continued work. It is really extraordinary. Renee, thank you so much for joining. Dr. Adrian, Mr. Ross, thank you as always. Lori, really appreciate your work. And of course, our IT staff, Todd, and our communication staff, Una. We couldn't do any of this without you. We have been through a heck of a year. I think we are all ready to close the book on 2020. I know I am. This has been tough, but one of the great things about living through difficult times is that we get to live through them as Bowie residents, which means that chances are we have neighbors, we have friends, we have local and civic and religious leaders. We have people in our community who step up to the plate, who don't take no for an answer, who don't get easily dissuaded or discouraged, and who come together. The number of times I've seen Bowie residents, come out to support each other, volunteer, get involved with the food pantry, come to me, come to my colleagues with 1,000,001 ideas of new things that we should be doing. It really is extraordinary, and it's a wonderful reminder of the resilience and the perseverance and the just general goodness of our community, of our surrounding communities, and of the people in them. It is the people who make a community what it is, and we are very fortunate with the people we have. And so thank you so much to everyone for participating tonight. I'm really grateful for this event, and I look forward to being involved with many more in any capacity that I can.
Thank you. That's all we have for you all. And good night, everyone.